We're going to get started. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Shorey Bozorg-Mary, the Divisional Director of Student and Academic Services at UCI's Office of Information Technology. I am delighted that you have chosen to spend this hour with us. Today's event is brought to you by the Women in Technology organization at UCI, which is an affinity group and is dedicated to connect, inspire, and empower women in technology to reach their full potential as innovators and leaders. I would like to thank our executive sponsor, Vice Chancellor of Information Technology and Data, Tom Andriola, for sponsoring this event. Women in Technology stands to recognize and bring awareness to gender imbalances in the workplace. This is a critical step to strengthen the community of women in technology and bring forth creative approaches toward improving diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is with great pleasure that the Women in Technology Advisory Board and Education Subcommittee present our first event of 2021, Allyship That Makes an Impact: How to Support Women in IT. We are inspired by real stories and experiences of women and minorities and recognize the fact that allies play a critical role in the success of underrepresented employees throughout their careers. Everyday actions have the power to make a real difference. But what are these actions? We will see today. In the next hour, you will hear a keynote presentation by acclaimed author Karen Catlin, and we will then move to a fireside chat discussing challenges women and other underrepresented employees face in the workplace and practical ways that every individual can take an action and be an ally. Due to the short time we have, we are going to apologize in advance if we're not able to respond to all the questions raised during the event or shared at the registration. I would like to note we are recording this session and we're going to be making the recording available on our website. We're also enabling live transcripts. Now it is my absolute pleasure and a great honor to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Karen Catlin. After 25 years building software products and serving as a vice president of engineering at Macromedia and Adobe, Karen Catlin witnessed a sharp decline in the number of women working in tech. Frustrated but galvanized, she knew it was time to switch gears. Today, Karen is a leadership coach and a highly acclaimed author and speaker on inclusive workplaces. She's the author of 3 books: Better Allies, Everyday Actions to Create Inclusive, Engaging Workplaces, The Better Allies Approach to Hiring, and Present, a Techie's Guide to Public Speaking. Karen holds a computer science degree from Brown University, and a fun fact about her is that she spent her early career working on educational software systems at Brown. Karen, I'm extremely excited to have you with us today, and you may now have the floor.
Shorey, thank you for that lovely introduction and for hosting me. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And what I'm going to do is start off with the backstory. You heard a little bit about my bio from Shorey, but I want to tell you more about the backstory of how I came to write my books on allyship and give myself this title, this job title of being an advocate for inclusive workplaces. So as you heard, I worked in tech. I worked in tech for about 25 years. I started out as a programmer, writing code for a living. And over time, I moved into leadership roles. And most recently, I was a vice president of engineering at Adobe. Now, during the 25 years I worked in tech, I saw a decline happening in gender diversity in the field. When I started my career a long time ago, there used to be a lot more women getting computer science degrees and frankly, sitting side by side with me in conference rooms, in the cubes next to me and so forth. But I noticed a decline happening. And while I was still at Adobe, I decided I wanted to make sure I was supporting the women who were in tech. And so I started our employee resource group for women. I started mentoring a lot of women, and basically being an advocate for gender equality in various meetings I was in, looking for representation on stage, at events, internal conferences, and even just meetings where who was giving the presentations, who was being called on, things like that. Now, I was doing that advocacy work within Adobe in addition to being a VP of engineering. And over time, one of them became my passion, and it wasn't VP of engineering anymore. So about 9 years ago now, I decided to pivot in my own career and become a leadership coach focused on women who work in tech. And I love leadership coaching, but I soon realized after starting my practice that I had a big problem. The big problem was that, well, it wasn't with my clients. My clients are amazing. Don't think it was with me. I think I'm a decent leadership coach, still working to get better, but I think I'm okay. The problem was this. All of my clients were working in tech companies where the closer you got to the C-suite, to the CEO, just the maler and paler it got. And with all due respect to anyone who's joining who is male and or pale, I'm white myself, that's just what the demographics showed. And so these organizations clearly were not the meritocracies that most people thought they were, where if you work hard and grow your career, you will get ahead. No, there's something going on. The white men were getting ahead at a greater rate than everybody else. So I decided to truly help my clients be successful, I had to make all of tech more inclusive. I know you're probably thinking, you're one person, Karen, that's a big job. And I get it, I agree. It was a little aspirational, more than a little, but I decided I really wanted to make tech more inclusive. And to change the world these days, what's the first thing someone does? Well, they start a Twitter handle, right? So I started the Twitter handle @BetterAllies. Gosh, it was 6 years ago now. And my goal was to share what I saw were these simple everyday actions anyone could take to be better allies and to be more inclusive at work. Simple everyday actions such as, I pledge to notice when an interruption happens in a meeting and redirect the conversation back to the person who was interrupted with a simple, I'd like to hear Jennifer finish her thought. Another example might be about giving feedback. I'll make sure that as I give feedback, written performance feedback, for example, to my employees, that I will give the same amount of feedback to men and women, and I'll make sure that I am giving them all job skills they could be learning and emphasizing the impact of the work they're having so they know what to keep doing and know what to improve on. Because it turns out there's a lot of feedback differences in genders. This little Twitter handle started growing in popularity. I was tweeting things I saw in the media, in news reports, as well as research that social scientists were doing, and not just on gender diversity, but how to be allies for people from any underrepresented group based on their gender, but also race, ethnicity, sexual orientation and identity, and age, abilities, and so forth. I was trying to give people these everyday actions they could take to be more inclusive. So as I'm tweeting just a couple times a day, I started getting speaking engagements. People would somehow message this Better Allies anonymous Twitter handle. I wasn't associated with it at the time, but they'd message the anonymous Twitter handle and say, hey, does anyone from the Better Allies Initiative do any public speaking? And I would read that and I'd think, the Better Allies Initiative, it's just me tweeting a couple times a day. But that's cool, I guess. And I wanted to speak on the topic, but I also wanted to stay anonymous online. So I would just reply and say, yes, one of our contributors does public speaking. We will put you in touch with her. And then I'd go over to my personal Twitter account and message the person and say, hey, I'm Karen Catlin. I contribute to Better Allies. I love speaking in public. What do you have in mind? So I started speaking on stages at conferences, as well as internal tech companies. I started speaking about this everyday action approach. And inevitably, every time I gave a talk, someone would say, hey, Karen, do you have a book? Because we want more of this. That would happen in the Q&A. And for years, I was saying, no, I don't have a book. I don't have a book. But eventually I did write my book. In fact, I've written 2 books now. And here's the pictures. Better Allies on the left, everyday actions to create inclusive, engaging workplaces. And then on the right, the Better Allies approach to hiring. And I am thrilled to be here today to be sharing just a few of the strategies in this keynote. And then we're going to get into a lot more detail during the fireside chat with Jennifer and Jason. And I'm so glad you're all here because this is an overall message about my work. I believe inclusion is a job for everyone, not just for people who have those words, diversity, inclusion, belonging on their business card. There's an important role for anyone who is head of diversity, head of DEI for an organization, for an institution, absolutely. But these are things we all need to do in any conversations we have in the work we're getting every day. It's a job for us all. Okay, so first step, let's get into some content here. The first step is to actually get to know people from underrepresented groups. Because unfortunately, most of us have just like me networks full of people who are just like us, probably because we have something in common with them. We enjoy hanging out with them. We get them, and we want to spend more time with them. So most of us do have these just like me networks that form over time. Now, I want you to think about your network, your professional network. And would you say that your network is very diverse, somewhat diverse, or I could do better? Now, I would love for some or all of you to share your answer in the chat. And if you open the chat, select from the pull down panelists and attendees so we can all see your responses. I'll get it going here. Mine is somewhat diverse. I would love to hear and see what other people have to say here. How would you answer this question? I'll take a sip of my tea while the answers are coming in. And please respond to panelists and attendees. Choose that from that drop down just above where you type. Again, a few coming just to me or just to the panelists, which is fine, but let's have more people respond. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of somewhat diverse, like me. I appreciate one answer, which is mine is a reflection of the United Nations. Good for you. I would say that is very diverse. Great. This is not surprising. What I'm seeing coming in just directly to just panelists as well as to all of you is what I see when I give this talk at other places. Many people say it's somewhat diverse. There are often people saying, yeah, I could do better. Maybe one or two saying it's very diverse. Not surprised at all by the answers I'm seeing here today. But most of us do have these networks that could use more diversity. And I want to share the importance of this, not just from a point of view of like, oh, diverse networks should be good, of course, but some data that I've gathered and I've from other people's surveys. There was a survey done of Black employees, and there was a microaggression reported in the survey, which was Black employees saying that their manager has met one-on-one with other people on their team, but not with themselves, not with them. I can't imagine seeing my coworkers have one-on-ones with my manager and me never getting an invitation to go do that. I can't imagine, but this is something that was uncovered in a survey. In another survey, almost 60% of Black women reported that they had never had an informal interaction with a senior leader. An informal interaction may be when you're in person, getting a cup of coffee and the senior leader saying, hey, how was your weekend? Or how are your kids? Something like that. Or in a virtual setting, it might be receiving a chat message from a senior leader before a meeting really starts off saying, hey, good to see you here. I'm looking forward to what you have to say about the topic, right? None of that's happening, which means that they're not really part of someone's network, right? And then there's what happens outside of work. Outside of work, there's social science research telling us that men tend to hang out with male coworkers, whether that's on the golf course or a virtual poker game or grabbing a beer. Men are hanging out with male coworkers. And while they're having fun and socializing, they are also strengthening professional ties and probably talking about some business, some new deal that's going on, something that is aligned with the work. By contrast, women, we tend to hang out with women who are not part of our workplace network. We're hanging out with people in our community, maybe because we have young children in the same school, or it's part of a religious organization we belong to, or a book club, or a volunteer initiative we're a part of. We're hanging out with people outside of our work network. We're broadening our network, but we're not deepening those work ties, those workplace ties. And I also want to emphasize something here about, frankly, about the Me Too movement. This is an exact quote I got from a leader of a business unit when I was teaching a workshop in San Francisco a few years ago. And I was talking about the importance of diversifying networks. And he said, you know, my wife gets jealous when I have a work dinner with a female coworker. How should I handle that? Now, my first response when he asked this question in front of his whole business unit, right? My first response in my head was, go see couples counseling. Like, that was the first thing I thought, was they need couple counseling. But I did not say that out loud. I thought it was a little too snarky, and I wanted to be respectful to the man who was hosting me and paying for me to teach a workshop. So instead, I simply responded like, well, if your wife gets jealous when you have dinner with a female coworker, then don't have dinner with any coworkers, because you don't want to be giving men an unfair advantage compared to the women. Or always invite 2 or more people along to any work dinner. Would your wife be okay with that? He's like, yeah, I guess. I'm not sure if he actually changed his behavior, but I hope it had a lasting impact on everyone else in that workshop. So let's talk about how these Just Like Me networks limit diversity and why we want to have more diverse networks. One is, let's face it, we hire from our network all the time. We have a new position open. We think, who have I worked with before? Who do I know? Who do I trust, right? Who would I want to bring on? So if we have homogeneous networks, we are going to hire more homogeneity, become self-fulfilling. And these networks also impact who we trust. Now, who we trust, of course, people in our network who we know, who we've worked with, who we've hung out with, we trust them more. And as we're working, moving forward, navigating our workloads, we might be in positions to give people stretch assignments to go learn something new that hasn't been done before. Who are we going to give those to? Those stretch assignments where someone can learn a new skill? We're probably going to give them to people we trust, people in our network. Who we're going to promote if we are in that position, who we are going to put in different roles during reorganizations, or if we're doing succession planning for our own role, who we are going to give responsibility to, right? All of this is coming down to who we know and trust. And so these Just Like Me networks just limit diversity as we think about our workplaces and our organizations. So I'm all about actions, very practical approach to being more inclusive. So here are some actions you could consider taking to diversify your network. The first is literally just get to know colleagues who aren't like you, however you want to define that. If there's a new person joining your team who is of a different gender or race or age or abilities, actually reach out, find out a little bit more about them than you might otherwise know just by working, and get to know them. And look for opportunities to get to know colleagues that you've been working with for years who maybe you've never really exchanged some personal time with above and beyond a work project. Another thing you can do is join employee resource groups with permission. So employee resource groups at different organizations and institutions can be in place for women, for Pride, for members of the LGBTQ community, for Black employees, and so forth, for veterans. Look to see if you can't join some of these groups, again, with permission. Say you're an ally, you want to learn more about the experience and support what they're doing. And if you can be invited and join them, you'll start learning about some of the challenges that they face, as well as expand your network. You can also look to attend events for people from underrepresented groups, again, to listen and learn. Events might be, I'm in tech, so the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing is a huge conference that is open to allies. Great opportunity. But I also get invitations and go to as many of these as I can for Black women in tech, Black employees in tech, Latinas in tech, lesbians who tech, for example. These are conferences out there that are open to allies, and I love being able to do it, and especially in a virtual time that we're all living with. These conferences are virtual. They're very cost effective to attend. There's no travel. I can Zoom in just for maybe a keynote or two. And again, look to learn from this network, but also diversify it as well. And last but not least, I'll say volunteer for organizations in your community who serve marginalized communities, so that you get to not only get to know more people in your community from these underrepresented groups, but also side by side volunteering with other people as well. It's a wonderful way to diversify networks. So I'm going to take a short pause here and ask all of you to think about how in the past you have diversified your network, or what would you add to the slide I've just put up here? What additional actions would you suggest that you've done or you're thinking about doing to diversify your network? And again, I love utilizing the chat, so please take a moment to type into the chat, share it with panelists and attendees so everyone can see your answer. But what would you add to this list that I am displaying now? What would you add? What you've done in the past to diversify your network? Thank you. Rich says, follow diverse voices on social media. Absolutely. By following diverse voices on social media, you're getting to hear about different concerns, different things that are happening, and get to know different people that way. Be curious. Thank you, Margaret. Absolutely. Be curious about other people. Seek out jobs where I'd have a diverse community of coworkers. Thank you, Megan. Love it. Eric says, participate in the UCI Inclusive Excellence Certification Program. I don't know what that is, but it sounds awesome. I'll just say that. Thanks, Eric. Denise said, ask someone to be my mentor. I assume that's someone from a different demographic than yourself, so you're diversifying your network that way. Join a volunteer project, symposium planning, subscribe to newsletters from diverse groups, lunch and learns with different departments and teams, Toastmasters, get involved with Toastmasters in your community or on your campus. Oh my gosh, these are I can't keep up with them. These are such great examples. Okay, woo, intramural sports. All of you, thank you for sharing these. I want, if you're thinking of typing something or mid-typing, keep them coming. Keep sharing, because all of you can learn from each other in a wonderful way. But I'm going to keep going so that we stay on schedule. The next thing I'm going to cover is, well, once you have a more diverse network and you're getting to know people from underrepresented groups, what do? Well, the next thing that we're going to cover is talk about sponsorship. And I'm not talking about a sponsorship program where you might be assigned to somebody to be your sponsor or vice versa. Those are great, but there are also everyday acts of sponsorship that I want to talk about. So what do these things look like? I'm going to share 5 ways you can sponsor a coworker from an underrepresented group. The first is recommend them for those stretch assignments I mentioned earlier and speaking opportunities. Both of these are like multivitamins for our career, rocket booster fuel, if you want to think of it that way. Because when we have and are assigned to stretch assignments or to give updates, even at a department meeting or on stage at a bigger event, we get visibility. Okay, people see us in a different light. They see our expertise, they see what we're capable of, and that in turn gives us the opportunity to have new career opportunities ahead of us. So as an ally, look to connect those dots and recommend people from underrepresented groups from for these kinds of activities. And if you are in positions to do this a lot, The next time you have to think of someone to take on some new task force or work group or project, or to give an update at a meeting, think about who normally comes to mind. And if there's someone who kind of reminds you of your younger self, is the same demographic, go back to your network and think of somebody else. What else can we do? We can endorse people publicly. Now I'm going to give an example of what this looks like so you get a feeling for it. When I first joined Adobe, I was a senior leader at the company, but I didn't know anyone and they didn't really know me. And I remember sitting in a meeting with my boss very soon after I joined, and I heard him say, well, what I learned from Karen Catlin is the following. And he went on to share something I had told him in a one-on-one meeting, maybe the previous week. But the fact that at the time he was the senior vice president, the fact that he said my name out loud and said he had learned something from me, I know gave me credibility with all my new peers. And frankly, it made me feel great in the moment. So look for opportunities, whether it's saying you learned something from someone, or other ways to think about giving someone a public shout out, a signal boost, an endorsement. Another thing you can do is share their career goals with decision makers. So as you're getting to know coworkers, the new employees, whoever that might be, as you're getting to know them, ask about their career goals. Do they have a goal to maybe learn a new skill, to grow into leadership roles, to management, maybe to move internationally and do something? Get to know what they want to do. Be curious about that. There's that theme I saw that in the chat. Be curious about what they want to do, and then look to connect the dots with people who might be able to open those career doors. Next, number 4 is invite them to high-profile meetings. Now, some of you may be like, I've got so many meetings, who would want to go to another one if they didn't have to? But for someone from an underrepresented group who doesn't have visibility into those meetings, whether those are strategic planning meetings or meetings with external advisory boards or symposium planning committees from multiple universities, right? For someone who doesn't usually get to do that kind of work, this is something they get to learn by just interacting and watching how this all plays out. But they also, again, get that visibility that's so important that members of underrepresented groups often are not privy to. So consider doing that. And then last but not least, speak their name when they aren't around. Now, I learned this technique, this tip from Carla Harris. And Carla Harris is a senior leader at Morgan Stanley. And she has a fabulous TED Talk where she talks about meritocracy, or actually the lack thereof. She talks about how most people believe if I work hard, especially early in my career, if I work hard, heads down, get my work done, people will notice and I'll get ahead. But in reality, what happens is the people need to know about your work and then talk about you in the rooms that you aren't in those promotion meetings, calibration meetings, talent management meetings, right? The people of power need to know the work and the skills of the people who aren't quite in that room yet. So if you are an ally and are in a position to speak about someone's skills and sing their praises in the rooms they're never even in, look for opportunities to do that as well. So I'm going to wrap up this keynote portion now and let you all know that just as I shared just a tiny little bit, I hope that I will have encouraged you to read one of my books. You start with the book that has the white background, but read Better Allies to understand all this more. I also have a weekly newsletter called 5 Ally Actions. I send it out every Friday. It's basically 5 things I've learned during the week to be a better ally. And I love sharing that with everyone. You can go to betterallies.com to sign up. And then I'm also very active on Twitter, as you heard from my origin story, but also on Instagram and Medium. So you could find Better Allies there too. So at this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to move into the next portion of today's event.
Thank you, Karen. That was very, very inspiring and packed with practical insights. I always enjoy hearing you and listening to you. Next, I would like to introduce our highly accomplished fireside chat speakers, and I will start by introducing Dr. Jennifer Wang Ma. Jennifer is an associate professor of teaching in computer science department at UCI's Donald Bren School of Information and Computer Sciences, a faculty advisor of Women in Information and Computer Sciences, a co-chair of the Computer Science and Engineering Steering Committee. Jennifer is an inaugural member of Women in Tech at UCI Advisory Board. Prior to joining UCI in 2018, she was a teaching faculty at Stony Brook University for 12 years. She received the Computer Science Departmental Award for Undergraduate Education in 2012 and for major contributions to undergraduate education in 2016. Jennifer received her MS and PhD degrees in computer science from UCLA in areas of wireless and distributed embedded systems. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here. Next, I would like to introduce Jason Baldry, who joined UCI in 1998 and is currently the Assistant Dean for the UCI Claire Trevor School of the Arts. In his role, he oversees technology, finance, facilities, human resources, outreach, and production departments. Prior to his current role, he served as the Director for Technology for the school and supported faculty research and student learning. He served as Chair and Vice Chair of the UCI Staff Assembly and as Junior and Senior Delegate for the Council of University of California Staff Assemblies, and currently serves as an inaugural member of Women in Tech at UCI Advisory Board. Jason is a proud UCI alumnus and holds both a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science and an MBA. Thank you, Jason and Jennifer. It is an absolute delight to have you with us today. And Jennifer, you may take it from here.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you. Karen, thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. I've faced many challenges throughout my career, some of which I really wish that I had had an ally to help support me. Listening to your advice as well as your insights as to how we can assist each other inspires me now in my current position to reach out and be a better ally for those around me and other women. One of the things that I've experienced in my career has been a challenge sometimes to get my words in edgewise in, for example, a meeting. I've experienced being talked over, interrupted, and even have my own ideas, which I just presented, be repeated again and then be accepted the second time they are heard. So now that we're in these virtual meetings, right, I do sometimes see some people having trouble getting a word in edgewise. I'm sorry. What can we do as allies to assist them when we notice this behavior, right? We're all unmuting ourselves and trying to jump in there. How can we help to advocate them so their voices can be heard?
Yes, what a good question. And I feel like we're kindred spirits. I've experienced this over my career a number of times too, Jennifer. It's not inclusive, and over time you're like, why do I even bother? Why even bother trying? But we want people to feel included, right? So allies, pay attention. If you're using any kind of virtual conferencing system, Zoom or whatever, like whatever the technique is that you have adopted, whether it's coming off of mute or raising your physical hand or using an icon, like pay attention. And if that person never seems to really like get the word in or get called on or whatever, say something like, hey, I'd like to hear Jennifer, Jennifer wants to speak. I see her trying to come off of mute. Hey, Jennifer, what do you want to say? Really just like that's so easy. Every day, I think we can be doing that. Now, what also happens though, is there can often be the one person in the room who does a lot of talking, who tends to be like just the talker, right? And if you are an ally and you see someone dominating the conversation, again, leverage the technology that we're all using these days and send them a private note, whether that's a chat through the technology or if you're on Slack or something, but send them a private message and say, hey, you're talking a lot, you may not realize it. I think I am too. And why don't, for the second half of the meeting, we both talk less and listen more? Like just give that little nudge. And so those are two things allies can do to make meetings more inclusive.
Thank you. Those are great ideas, Karen.
Karen, thank you so much for being here, and Shori, thank you for organizing and making this all happen. I think one of the things I'm sure many people are wondering is, why is there a guy up here? And you know, one of the things that brought me to women in technology, my history, of course, in technology, but also as a Black male, I often am challenged on the topic of white privilege, and you know, got exhausted answering the question, but still wanted to learn and still wanted to be better at answering the question, and so I had to come to figure out, well, how do I answer this question? And one of the ways I'm doing that is trying to learn more myself about where I have privileges. And in technology, it's a foregone conclusion, at least unfortunately, that men are the predominant demographic. So it's helpful for me for reasons to help other people understand. And so I think I saw in the chat, Janice Hong said something about being proactive in your learning. And so for me, it's about service. It's, you know, how do I serve other people? And I want to understand, and I think some people, I hope that the audience will benefit from hearing you talk about the differences between being a knight and an ally that you talk about in your book, because it's, and I hope you'll explain it for everyone, but it's really easy, and for me, it's like, I want to be a knight, but I know that I should be an ally.
Yeah. And it's subtle. Thank you for asking that, Jason. So a knight, let's think about what comes to mind. A knight is someone from a long time ago who would ride in on their strong steed and save the damsel in distress, right, from whatever was going on. And in our workplaces today, there's opportunity to do a lot of that saving. Saving being such as looking out for one person and helping them, making sure they aren't the equivalent of the damsel in distress in the workplace. But better is to look for systemic change that can benefit not just that one person, but everyone, and be inclusive of everyone. Now, let's make this real. Let me give you an example. An example would be, imagine you're on a hiring committee and you're interviewing, and I'll say it's a Black man. Let's say you're interviewing a Black man, and the other people in the hiring committee say, you know, I just can't put my finger on it. I don't think he'd fit in here. He wouldn't be a culture fit with us. I just don't know what it is. Now, the knight in shining armor might say, oh, I think he'd be the best person. In fact, if we hire him, I will make sure I mentor him and that he is successful. Okay, that's great. You're helping that one person. And I don't want to dissuade that, but take it to the next level and look for how you can drive systemic change. An example of the systemic change in this situation would be, hey, it looks like we're being subjective as we're interviewing candidates. I think we need to take a step back and put objective hiring criteria, exactly how we're going to be measuring our candidates so that we're being consistent, because I'm seeing that. And so that's an example of that one-off, sure, go be the knight, help out, but really drive systemic change. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, as you were talking about that, in academia, one of the things that makes us a little different is that we have a lot of titles, doctor, dean, assistant, associate professor, and those are very important. And yet we have this. It doesn't always. It doesn't always happen equitably. I personally have noticed this in seeing the difference when I was the director of IT versus now as an assistant dean. People use my title now where they didn't before. Can you talk about how you would encourage the equitable use of titles, regardless of gender, because I think we do see it as disproportionately affecting women not being recognized for their position.
Yeah. So women, yes. So there's a well-documented, a lot of anecdotal stories of, there are two equally qualified people with the same honorific, whether, let's call it doctor. Two doctors in a room, and people will refer to the male doctor as Dr. So-and-so and the female doctor by her first name. Lots of anecdotal stories about that. There are also stories where there are male professors who talk about, like, they want to be connecting with their students. So they tell their students, call me by my first name, it's fine. But then what happens is students get comfortable calling the male professor by their first name, and they do that for the female professors too, who already are struggling with people not using their titles and acknowledging them for the expertise that they have and the hard-earned degree that they have earned, right? So I think it is respectful to use hard-earned honorifics, as I call them, honorifics. And when, as an ally, when we see people not doing that, I think it's just good to chime in and do it ourselves. So even if someone is just calling you Jason, I might refer to you as, and I've already forgotten your title, isn't this embarrassing? Associate Dean Jason Waldry. I'm so sorry. I'm human. So anyway, use the honorifics yourself, the titles for everybody, and do it consistently. And this is the same thing you can do too if someone mispronounces someone's name, which I'm guilty of this a lot. I mispronounce names I'm not familiar with or not exposed to a lot. I just do it. So as an ally, if we notice someone mispronouncing someone's name, we can just chime in with and use the name with the correct pronunciation just in the course of our conversation.
That's great. Yeah, I love when students, even if they just call me professor, I'm equally happy for that. I had a nickname at Stony Brook of which was my net ID, right? So Jaywong was my nickname, and all the students, everybody used to call me just by that, right? Not professor or acknowledge. At some point, I just went with it, right? Because even the staff was starting to use it in reference to me. But it did at first take a little bit of adjustment, right? Why not Professor Wong or any of these things?
Professor Jay Wong.
Yeah, exactly. Professor Jay Wong is equally good, right? So Karen, you mentioned when talking about a night in Ally, you gave a story about hiring and interviewees and things. For someone like me, or even Jason as an ally, sometimes we have strong women candidates. How do we kind of advocate for them or promote them or just sing their praises, well deserved, right? But do so without seeming like I'm just promoting them because they're a fellow woman, right? Mm-hmm. Or that Jason's just promoting them because they're a fellow Black colleague, right? What advice can you give there on?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, realize how many mediocre white men are having their praises sung by other white men just because they're in their network, right? So just acknowledge that. The second thing is, I think it's, why not own it and say, here in our institution, we have a goal of diversifying our faculty, the department's faculty group. And I have a fabulous female colleague, but by the way, I'll try to say women colleague instead of female, just because it's inclusive of trans women who might not be female from birth. So I'm trying to fix my own language here. So I have this fabulous woman that we absolutely should consider. What do you need to know about her to make sure that she gets included in the slate, for example? I think own it. The other thing you could do, if it seems appropriate, and this is kind of situational, but if you think that there is some bias at play with who is making it past the, here's the resume and here's who we're going to be phone screening or something like that. If you think there's bias at play, here's one of those knight versus ally moves, is recommend this best practice. And it's a best practice that comes from Google. Simply reminding people that bias can creep into the interview process. simply reminding them of the ways that might show up allows or helps people mitigate that bias, in the next meeting that they're in to talk about candidates. So remind people, hey, bias can creep in, not sure if that's going on here. And I just want to make sure that we're aware that bias can creep in, and we are trying to diversify our faculty slate. So let's consider this professor that I'm recommending. Do you think you could do that, Jennifer?
I think I can, yes. Just to kind of follow up on that, Karen, so I've seen a candidate kind of be questioned or heavily challenged right then and there, more heavily so than other candidates, right? And when it's happening live, right? Your suggestion is great for afterwards, but at that point, right, that candidate has kind of lost their shot in some senses, in people's minds. Is there anything that we can do right then in the moment when we see this behavior happening? What is the correct way to kind of, try and mitigate the situation and help them recognize that this is happening real time?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So there was just an article published, I think I saw it in the Wall Street Journal this morning, that there's a study of women econ professors and this kind of questions they get, not during the interview process, but on stage at events. And how many more hostile questions they get versus the men. Hostile being things that really are off topic, kind of undermining their expertise and so forth. So I think this is a well-documented thing that happens. What I would recommend is also understanding during the interview process, there is this thing, well, it's not even just during interviews, it's during any kind of career development kind of analysis or evaluation. There's something called prove it again bias. Prove it again bias means that women have to keep proving they're capable of doing the job, where men tend to be promoted based on potential or hired based on potential. For a woman, it may be like, I'd like to make sure she can actually lead a research team before I think she needs to show us just one more time that she can lead a big research team or land a big grant. I think she needs to just prove it one more time before we give her that responsibility. Whereas a man, it might look like, oh my gosh, I think he'd be awesome. He's got everything it takes. I know he could get land a big research grant. So look out for prove it again bias and call it out and just say, I think we're being unfair here, inequitable. We're holding women to a higher standard. Call it out. And that might mean calling it out in private through a private chat, if that's the way the power dynamics are. But if you are in a position of power yourself, I think it would be worth respectfully bringing it up in the moment.
Thank you.
One of the things that I think both you and Jennifer raised as an issue before, is something I've seen myself, is when a woman's called, I can't speak anymore. When a colleague that's a woman says something and then it gets repeated by a male colleague, and only then is it accepted as a valid issue. And I've seen it happen. I've watched it happen live in front of me. And my question here is, what do I do in that situation? How can I be helpful as an ally when I see it happen?
Yeah. I hear this from so many of my coaching clients. I heard it just yesterday from a client who is just so frustrated that she has to work with this one guy who always does that behavior. So frustrating. So as an ally, when you see it happening, first of all, pay attention, because it is happening. So pay attention to it. And when you see it happen, I think chiming in with a simple, respectful, but simple line such as, hey, I see you agree with what Shore said a few minutes ago. Or, I like the way you're amplifying Shore's idea. Could you imagine doing that, Jason?
Yeah, I can. It's always just, it's hard to remember to do it in the moment.
This is one of those ways, though, to endorse someone publicly. Tell them, remind people that someone else came up with the idea or mentioned it earlier in the meeting or last week or something like that. Yeah.
So one of the other things that I've noticed, and I've even done this myself in the past, is that when we're in meetings asking to say report what we've done or our accomplishments or how far we've gotten, and you know, I feel like, and I've, that I have to convince everybody that I have done so much work, that I need to give all the details and all the minuscule tasks and make it seem like I've worked really hard, right? And that puts a lot of pressure, right? Whereas I see a male colleague come along and say, yep, everything's good, I'm still working on, those kind of, relaxed responses, and the expectation of proving how hard they worked is not there. So how, as an ally, can we respond to these types of incidents or these types of actions that we're observing?
Yeah. So I do think it's helpful to coach people who are undermining themselves almost. And I don't know if that's what's going on here, so bear with me. But women, and this is also well documented, we feel that we have to prove ourselves over and over again. We have to provide all the details. We have to show we're, looking at this big project and what we're getting done. And because we are concerned that someone's going to start poking holes in our project, in our work, if we don't get ahead of it and share a lot. So I would look out for that behavior and coach women to take a different approach. Try at the next meeting just sharing some of the highlights. Announce, for example, well, today I'm going to tell you 3 things I've accomplished. There's a lot more detail in my report if you want to, if you want more information, or contact me later, whatever that might look like. But coach the women that you're seeing who are going into so much detail, and kind of look to change and disrupt what's happening in that meeting. It sounds like it's a standing meeting. Change what's happening so everyone adopts an approach that's going to be more consistent and therefore equitable.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
As we're starting to get questions in the Q&A, one question came in from Patty. Let's say you've overcome all these obstacles and you make it into a leadership role, and people think that you're simply there filling the checkbox, the quota. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, you're the diversity hire is one approach. So a couple things that I've heard for best practices. One is, if you're not this person, you're the ally. Allies should be, when they're promoting someone, hiring someone, whatever that is, think about the email you might send out to the group announcing that this person is joining the team, got hired, or they have this new responsibility. In that email, make sure you are emphasizing the very high bar that they had to pass to get to that point, why they were the right person for the job. To kind of get ahead of any of that type of, they're just a diversity hire. They're just in the place to check the box that we have one of those, right? Another thing I've seen done is tell people themselves, like ahead of time. It's like, so they don't hear it, secondhand or whatever, but tell them ahead of time, like, by the way, the reason we hired you is because you passed this very rigorous interview process. You had the right research, the right credibility, the right credentials, whatever. You passed all of that. And that's why we hired you. That's another best practice for getting ahead of that. So look out for it. Yeah. Mitigate it.
Thank you. It's helpful. I think one of the other things I witnessed myself this morning, a colleague commented that I look good in red, and I didn't take any offense to that, but I wonder if the situation is reversed when I witnessed that very same comment made about a woman, and it focuses on their appearance and not on their performance. How do we deal with that kind of microaggression?
Yeah, you said it so well, Jason, just now. It's like, it's focusing on their appearance, not their performance. So again, I'm the kind of person, I prefer to give constructive criticism in private, so not in a public way. So if I notice someone doing that to a colleague, let's say she's Latina, and this is an example from my book, but it's like, oh my gosh, Latinas look so great in bright colors. You look awesome today. I would pull that person aside and share something along the lines of what you just said, Jason, of like, when you do that, I know you're probably trying to pay her a compliment, but you're focusing on her appearance instead of the work that she is capable of, the impact she's having here, the performance. So just give that piece of feedback in private, I think. And if you feel comfortable, let the person know that you did that. I noticed someone was commenting on your clothing. I gave them some feedback. I hope they stop doing that. I think it would be better if they complimented you on your work product.
So another question that we got from the attendees survey was trying to determine what is that difference between being an ally and being a mentor, because a lot of the things that you're saying almost sound like a mentorship, right, where somebody's advocating on behalf of somebody. So can you maybe elaborate on the difference between these two?
Yeah, so I define mentors as someone who shares their experience with someone else. This is what I've done over my career. This is how I published my first paper or got my first grant or moved into management. Like, this is how I did that. I'm going to share my experience with someone else so that they can learn from it. That's a mentor. An ally is trying to make the workplace more inclusive through these everyday actions. So they aren't necessarily sharing their experience in the same way, but they are looking to make the workplace more inclusive.
What advice would you give someone wanting to be an ally and having those difficult conversations about discrimination? I've opened up myself and said, this is why I'm here. And so I've invited people to talk to me about those difficult conversations, race and gender. But for everyone else who may not quite feel, how should they broach it with someone who hasn't said, I'm willing to talk about it?
Right. And I'm going to answer super fast because we're almost at the top of the hour, and I know Shorey has some closing comments. So first of all, get comfortable with making mistakes. Being an ally is a journey. You don't have to know how to do it all at once. You can say something to someone like, I'm not sure I'm going to use the right language here, but I want to have a conversation with you. And sign up for my newsletter or read my book to learn more, because I've learned so much and I love sharing that with people. But again, get comfortable with making mistakes, learn from them, iterate, get better. And with that, I think we need to move on to Shorey's closing comments. I am going to share my screen again. And Shorey.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason, Jennifer, and Karen. I just extend my deepest gratitude to all of you. And I have a couple of seconds of closing remarks, and I wish we had a lot more time. It seems that this just started the conversation. So thank you for your courageous. Thank you for speaking up. I understand these are very delicate but significant topics. And our slogan for Women in Technology Affinity Group is Advance, Inspire, Empower, and Act. And this really resembles those values. And I wanted to also say thank you to our guests who, by showing up, emphasize leadership matters and allyship matters. It is our hope that you have discovered practical ways to make a meaningful change for women and underrepresented colleagues in our workplace and lean in on the journey of becoming a better ally. And I want to read a couple of sentences from Karen's book, as she so brilliantly writes. Allies have a duty to speak up, speak out, and take action. And later she continues to say, being an ally is a journey, and you don't have to do it all at once. Start with a single act. While it may seem small, you will make a difference. You may even start a ripple effect. And that's our hope for this event today. So take one step today. It could be to check out one of Karen's books or visit our website at womenintech.uci.edu to subscribe and stay connected, or talk to your colleagues about what inspired you today. And in closing, we look forward to seeing you again soon and hosting future events. We would like to hear your ideas for future topics and appreciate your thoughts on today's experience. We will follow up with a survey that you should receive as soon as you disconnect from this Zoom session. And I look forward to embarking on an allyship journey with all of you that is centered around advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion for all underrepresented minorities. And thank you so much for being with us today.